rehash for people that weren't able to join. Austin created a GraphQL Lambda-based application, and then used CDK to create a pipeline to deploy the application. And so with this meetup, we're going to go ahead and build on that. Take that API that was deployed as part of that the last meetup that we did, and then start looking at, really for more of a production-like use case. What does it look like to deploy your application to multiple accounts, multiple regions? Really something that's a little bit more production ready in terms of deployments here. And so with that being the case, let me go ahead and flip the slide here. Just as a quick round introductions, I am Kevin Tin, co-organizer of the AWS Meetup Group, senior cloud application architect at AWS, as well as an AWS community builder. Then we've also got Austin Lovelace, the initial founder of the AWS Meetup Group, a full stack / DevOps engineer at Stuzo. Austin is also an AWS community hero as well. And so to jump into the agenda for today's meetup, firstly, I'm going to just give a quick overview of CI/CD, just to baseline everyone on kind of the practices and the definitions, stuff of that nature. That won't take too long. Then we'll go ahead and dive into CDK pipeline components. Then we'll get into the cross-account setup. There's a lot of, this is a CI/CD talk, but it's probably like 60-40 CI/CD and then security as well. So we'll get into the cross-account setup. Then we'll get into the procedure to bootstrap an account region combo so that it trusts another account. Again, very heavy component of security in today's meetup. We'll get into the initial deployment of the CI/CD pipeline. We'll take a look at the architecture that we're going to deploy and talk about the difference of the architecture in a kind of a single region deployment versus a multi-region deployment. Then we'll get into some kind of final smaller topics to round out the conversation, namely how to organize the deployments, how to parallelize things so that your deployments can happen more quickly. We'll take a quick look at actions within the pipeline. This is critical if you want to start adding approval steps and testing and things of that nature, which any production quality pipeline would certainly need those sort of activities. And then finally, just a quick note on how to clean up all of the resources that are provisioned from the pipeline if you do go grab the repo and start to deploy things. So with that being said, CI/CD acronym stands for continuous integration, continuous deployment. The big idea here is we don't want code sitting around and getting stale. And so when a developer pushes to a repo, we want to immediately bring that into the pipeline, start to build a new version of the code, ideally test the code, and then go ahead and continuously deploy changes out to environments such as dev or QA so that we can always have the latest copy of the code without any kind of manual steps. And then obviously subsequently, the goal is to have software in production, providing value to our customers. So after the initial integration and testing, continuously being able to deploy the code out, new changes, new features for our customers so they can get value out of our software. And so with the kind of the baseline on what we're looking for out of CI/CD, let's go ahead and jump into the pipeline itself. So the pipeline defining is automated tooling that defines and automates the execution of steps to ensure that code is of sufficient quality and is deployed in a repeatable, consistent manner. I would also throw in a secure manner as well. Secrets management is very important. We'll get into that a little bit here in a bit as well. And so I found a pretty good blurb about CI/CD out on actually the Wikipedia on CI/CD. And so CI/CD bridges the gaps between the development and operation activities by enforcing automation and build, testing, and deployment of applications. So the name of the game is automation. And so again, upon an update to code in source control, we want a pipeline to go ahead and pick up the new changes, ensure quality, and then go ahead and deploy the new code out without any kind of manual actions. When I say manual actions, I mean, I don't want to be like copying like a compiled jar, into like a S3 bucket or something silly like that. We just want to push the code as developers and then have kind of a push button automated interface to get our code deployed out to environments so that we can test it and then subsequently deliver it to our customers. And to jump into some of the core CDK code pipeline concepts here, it all starts with the source. And so I've mentioned the code repository. And so a pipeline will have a source configured in it so that the pipeline knows where to grab the code from. It will then take the source upon changes, or even if you want to manually kick off the pipeline, it'll pull the source even if it hasn't changed, if you kind of start it manually, to go ahead and build the code. And in this case, we're very concerned with the infrastructure as code that the software is running on. It'll go ahead and build out the CloudFormation templates during this build step that are used in subsequent deployments to get our infrastructure that allows our application to run deployed out into various accounts and regions. Then in the code pipeline, it'll go ahead and go to update the pipeline. And so let's say that we start with a pipeline that only has one environment, call it the dev environment. And then we go ahead and in our coded pipeline, we add a QA environment. This update pipeline step allows the pipeline to recognize that there's now a new deployment target and change itself. And so finally, the published assets step will, once we go ahead and compile our code and generate CloudFormation templates, we'll need to have these assets, these CloudFormation templates, et cetera, published out to the various regions and accounts that we're going to use as deployment targets so that we can use these CloudFormation templates and have them applied and have our coded infrastructure materialized, if you will. And so final slide on definitions. The additional components here is we have the pipeline itself, which is the actual steps of the pipeline. I feel like we've been over that, so I won't kind of kick that horse too much. Then we have a stage, which is a single deployment unit of the application. In our case, we've got a VPC, we've got a database, and then we've got some serverless components such as a Lambda and API gateway. And so a stage being a single deployable kind of like grouping of the application, all the necessary dependencies will be composed of a VPC stack, an RDS stack, and then like an API stack that has the Lambda definition, API gateway definition, et cetera. And so to take that one step higher, a stage is a single, to deploy a stage would be like to deploy to account 123 US East 1. And so we'll get into, we need to deploy, to both US East 1 and US West 2, for example, if we're going to have cross region, good fault tolerance, et cetera. And so the concept of a wave allows us to combine multiple stages together to promote stages being deployed in parallel and therefore speed up our pipelines. And you'll see this once we get into the code. It's pretty straightforward. And then finally, we've got actions. And so before or after an individual stage runs or a wave runs, a set of stages, we can have steps or actions that we need to take. For example, if we want to do manual approval, if we want to run some tests, things of that nature. So actions allow us to really kind of round out the entire pipeline. So with all that being said, let's start to dive into the actual architecture. So given we are looking at cross-account deployments, we need to, I think we have to start with really the security of how do we get multiple accounts to trust each other. And so with that being the case, for today's meetup, we're going to use the following organization in which there are 4 accounts. And so going from left to right, we've got the pipeline account. And so this is where code pipeline is actually running, generating CloudFormation, et cetera. And then it will push out code and artifacts to a development account. And that's where our dev environment and our QA environment are going to live. We're going to keep dev in West 2, and we're going to keep QA in East 1. And then we have a stage account in which we're going to have a primary and secondary region. So here we start to get into some kind of DR strategies, if you will. And so our primary region, US West 2, is where we're going to have stage primary inside of the stage account. And then we'll have our RDS read replica, and then also another deployment of the other infrastructure in case West 2 goes down. We'll just go ahead and switch over to East 1 after promoting the RDS read replica. And that's going to be over in US East 1 within the stage account. Similarly, inside of another account to represent production, we're going to use West 2 as our primary and East 1 as the backup. And so here, you'll notice in the kind of the direction of the arrows, Code Pipeline is pushing to the various accounts. Before that can occur, the various accounts have to be configured to trust the account that the pipeline is running in. And so let's dive into how to set that up. And so I'm going to start to dive into the console, so it's not all slideware. So let's go ahead and just kind of baseline what we're doing here. So in a target account, so we've got the pipeline account, just to kind of level set on terminology, the target accounts are where infrastructure and software is being deployed to. So in either dev, stage, or prod, when I say a target account, we're going to have to go ahead and configure it to trust the pipeline account. And then that's going to be configured within a role. And so I'm going to call that the organization account access role. And then we're going to go ahead and attach a policy that things coming from an account that's specified, what policy can the principals coming from this account that's specified, what can they do from a policy standpoint? So with that being the case, let me go ahead and get into one of the accounts. So bear with me 1 second here. I will pull the console over so you can see it. Okay, so let me go ahead and make this a little bit larger. So that process is pretty simple. When you go into the create role portion of AWS IAM, and again, this is in the dev account, so this is one of the target accounts, you simply specify the account ID that, that should be trusted. Let's see here. And then there's some options here. Given this is more about the deployment infrastructure and less a security course, I'm going to kind of breeze by some of these options on the security. And so once we have that in place, we want to give administrator access. That policy we're going to go ahead and attach to this role in which we've entrusted the source account in. So kind of blowing by the tags, that gets us to this place where, let's see, let me round this out real quick. And so that would be, and I've already created this, but just to go through the hands-on steps in the console that you'd want to take to enable a trusted entity for this role, given the policy, that's what that configuration looks like. And so with that being the case, this has to be done in all 3 target accounts. And again, to go back to the PowerPoint, in the dev, stage, and prod account, this would all have to be configured. And so that was the steps to go through it in, sorry, going the wrong way in my slides, pretty smooth. So those are the steps to do that in one account. So we'll have to do this in every account that we want to deploy into. So that's the kind of the framework there, and it just has to be applied to each, has to be done in each one of those accounts. And so once the pipeline account has been set up to be trusted, then inside of the console, just to make it easy to switch back and forth between various accounts, we'll go ahead and set up a policy for the role that we're logging into, and then we'll go ahead and switch accounts here. And so to go ahead, let me pull this back over for a sec here. And we will go into IAM, and I'm pulling this off to another screen because it has a bunch of account numbers on here that I don't want to share on a stream that's going to be on YouTube perpetually. So do bear with me here. Okay, so the role that I assume in my pipeline account when I log in is a role called admin. And so what I've done is I have created this assume org account role policy for each of the target accounts. And so what that looks like, it's a pretty simple setup here, is the policy itself allows the secure token service assume role action to occur from this role to the target account and into that organization account access role that we set up. And so again, a policy will have to be created for each of the different target accounts that we're going to work with. But after that has been set up, it's really pretty nice to go ahead and go into, you've got the switch roles options here. And so the target account that you're going into, and then the role that you're wanting to switch into, that all is configured inside of here. And so whatever the account number for your dev, stage, or prod account would be, you can go ahead and configure that here, give it a display name, and you even have the option of a color. And so once you set that up for the various target accounts, it will keep your role history. And so this is super convenient if you're working with across a multi-account organization, a very quick way to switch into the different accounts here. And so now that I've switched into dev, if I wanted to say take a look at the RDS instances in dev, you know, it's going to filter that down to just the account that I switched into with that org account role. And so here, I've already deployed things. So we've got a DB instance in the US West 2, and then also there's going to be the read replica out in US East 1 as well. And so that is kind of the, that's the setup for the AWS console. If you want to be able to, you know, use the web browser and click into different accounts and see what's happening, it's a whole lot easier to be able to switch roles as opposed to have to go and log into 4 different accounts, 4 different root accounts. In fact, that's not recommended from a security perspective. Do protect your root accounts. Okay, and so the other portion of the preparation here to allow a pipeline from one account to deploy into another account is we have to do the CDK bootstrapping procedure, which I provided kind of AWS's definition of bootstrapping here. It's pretty long, so I won't read that to you. But I think the big takeaway here is each account region combo that we're going to deploy into, it has to be bootstrapped. And so with that being the case, we've got a primary and a secondary region, and we've got 3 accounts. And so we're going to have to run the bootstrap command 6 times. It does take a little bit of time in order for that bootstrap to run. So I'm not going to sit and run this manually 6 different times, but I will show you the command itself that needs to be run from the AWS, from the command line interface, CDK bootstrap. This is very important. We're going to run this in the context of one of the target accounts. So for example, if I was going to run this in my terminal, I would need to be using a profile that has like admin privileges in dev, for example, or stage or prod. You'll have to do that in all of them. And so here, trust, and then the pipeline account. And so this is the originating pipeline account that has the code pipeline project that's deploying from that's being deployed from. We go ahead and specify what privileges we want to give, basically the CDK build and deploy process. And since we're modifying infrastructure, et cetera, we're going to need a lot of privileges here. So we're just going to go with administrator access, the out-of-the-box policy there. And then finally, the target account ID and target region. And again, given we've got 3 different accounts and we've got 2 different regions, we're going to have, this command would have to be ran 6 times. So just to kind of go back to a visual. For each one of these regions within the accounts, this bootstrapping would have to be performed. So I've already gone ahead and done that. So wanted to save a little time, given we're looking to kind of round this out in about an hour or so. So again, the command is the CDK bootstrap command with trust. And so that -- trust is super important because it creates 3 roles in each account region combination that have been that have given trust back to the pipeline account. So very critical step there. And so to actually dive into the deployment of the pipeline itself, get into a little bit more code. I've got the repo here. The meetup page, the meetup event page has the link to the repo as well as this slide deck if you'd like to go through the steps kind of on your own at a different time. We did want to provide both the slide deck and the repo. And so to kind of dive into the anatomy of the pipeline CDK stack, let's go ahead and take a look at a couple of files. Firstly, as per typical organization of a CDK project, we've got the bin directory and the pipeline TS file. We are using TypeScript in today's meetup. And this creates the CDK app and instantiates the actual pipeline itself. And then inside of the lib directory, or in short for library, the CDK pipeline stack.ts file actually has a definition of the stacks, how to instantiate the VPC, the database, and the API layer themselves, as well as a definition of what environments need to be deployed to. And the deployment of this pipeline is a one-time process. So deploy it once, set some environment variables, and then it goes ahead and it will, anytime you push to your repo, it'll go ahead and start to deploy the latest version of your code out to your specified deployment targets. So pretty nice. As a quick aside, if you do, if the integration with source control, very critical here. In the pipeline account, we do need to configure a secret with a personal access token to the repo. And so that can be done by going to github.com, settings, tokens, creating a new token. Let me see, I can click this and go out here, generate a new token. And then the privileges that you want to, the scope that you want to constrain this token to is the ability to get information about repos, as well as create a repo hook. The repo hook is super important because when the pipeline is deployed for the first time, it goes ahead and it reaches out to the GitHub repo and it says, hey, anytime the contents of this repo changes, go ahead and let me know, and I'll go ahead and then pull the code and start to build. And so this webhook is what makes the automated kickoff of the pipeline start running, if you will. I'm sorry, I bet that text is a little small. Let me zoom in. Okay. And so once you have the token secret value, you'll want to go into Secret Manager and create a secret called GitHub token. That's just the default that the pipeline wants. There are ways to override the name of the secret to go and get this token from. I think Austin has an example of how to do that in the prior meetup. I'm just going to go ahead and go with the default just to kind of minimize some of the steps. And so that process of, we'll go back to our pipeline account. And so again, that switching roles up there in the top right menu, it allows you a really convenient way to navigate across various accounts, dev, stage, prod. And if you're in one of these, they give you the ability to go back to the pipeline account. And they call it back to admin because the role name in my pipeline account that I'm assuming is called admin. And so with that being the case, just a quick jump into Secrets Manager. And I am using West 2 as my primary. So just the quick steps to get the secret in here is once you generate the secret within GitHub, go ahead and store it as a plain text secret. And then you'll have to name it. And so the secret name that we're using here, like I said, is GitHub token, is that default that it's looking for. So that's the step to go ahead and create the token that's used from the pipeline. Okay, and so now that we've kind of gone through the setup of the GitHub credentials, we're ready to deploy the pipeline. So cloning the repo, making sure you have your credentials in your command line configured, stuff of that nature, so you have access to your pipeline account. And then it's just simply a CDK deploy CDK pipeline stack. And we have to specify, whoops. Let's see, I appear to have lost my slide. 1 second, please. Okay, and so we have to specify the CDK pipeline stack because we have a pretty complex CDK implementation here. And the stack in particular that we want to deploy is this CDK pipeline stack. So since there's different stacks within this repo, we do want to specify which one we are deploying, okay? And so you'll be prompted to create security roles, and then also a second prompt to just make sure you want to deploy the pipeline. Go ahead and accept both of those prompts. And then once that has completed, what you will have out in AWS within the code pipeline service is actually a pipeline. And so so upon the first deployment, it's going to go ahead and start executing the pipeline. And so you'll actually want to stop the pipeline because we do need to set some environment variables within the pipeline itself. We don't check any account IDs into the repo. Definitely a security anti-pattern to do that. So obviously we don't want to do that. And so if we don't set the environment variables, the pipeline is going to fail. So it'll kick off the first time, just go ahead and kill it. And then once you get into the pipeline itself, you'll see this build, the build step here. And so it actually very conveniently gives you a link to the code build project that is created as a part of the pipeline. And so once you get into that, there's an edit button and then edit environment. And then if you hit this drop down here to additional configuration, it will give you the ability to go ahead and set environment variables. Since I'm not necessarily trying to show off all my account IDs on YouTube, I went ahead and created a screenshot as opposed to doing that, doing it live in the demo itself. And so the 3 environment variables we need to go ahead and set up are the dev account ID, the stage account ID and the production account ID. And so to kind of pull that back to the code, why is that important? Because we go to the environment and grab the account IDs in question, and that allows us to not have to put our account IDs into the repo, open to the world. Again, definitely a security anti-pattern. You do have a few other options here. If you want to change your primary and secondary region, you can do that from the environment variables within the code build step. And additionally, if you want to go against a different org, repo name, or this should probably say branch and not repo. And yeah, that's definitely going to need to be branch. You've got the ability to go ahead and override that. So let's see. I'll check that commit in later. I'm just going against the default. The repo was created long enough before they switched the default name over to main. So we're just going to default to the old, which is master. And across the board, source control is going away from terminology such as master. The industry in general is going away from terminology such as master, whitelist, blacklist, stuff of that nature, to more sensitive phrasing such as allow list, deny list, or main. So just a quick aside there. And so with that being the case, clearly this will not work as we've not gotten any account IDs set here within our code for security reasons. So then we need to go ahead and set those. And so once we get into setting those, we are at the point in which we need to go ahead and go through our final security configuration. And this can be automated. I wanted to go through it manually because there's so much emphasis on security to make cross-account deployments work. I wanted to kind of show you all in the console, like what the actual steps are. I think for large scale kind of software development operations, I would look to automate this for sure. But just to go through it manually to kind of baseline and show everyone hands-on what is going on from a security standpoint, we can go ahead and jump into the portal again, or the console, I'm sorry. And so what we're doing here, and let me go ahead and pull in the appropriate screen here without showing off all of my account IDs. Bear with me, please. Okay. So here we are. Let me zoom in a bit. Make that full screen. And so when the pipeline is instantiated, when it is created the first time, that one manual deployment step that we're talking about, it's not been given the privileges required to allow it to switch roles into the other accounts roles that have been set up for the CDK bootstrapping process. And so if we take a look inside of here, again, looking at dev. So we created this statement to allow us to switch within the console. But whenever CDK bootstraps an environment, the account and region pair, it'll go ahead and create 3 roles that all have the same prefix. And so here we're going to go ahead and give the inside of the policy to be able to switch roles and do things inside of the dev account. We also want to give the pipeline role the ability to switch over and use the CDK roles. I think there's a list, there's like an asset upload, and then there's like a build and deploy role, if I'm not mistaken. That's just off the top of my head. So we can use this wildcard technique to basically give it access to all of the roles that have been created using this kind of randomized prefix that CDK uses whenever it bootstraps an environment. And let's see here. If you do need to go and figure out what those roles are. Let me take a quick, oops, sorry. Within roles, there will be, let's see here. Sorry, it was fun in the portal. So once we get into here, you can go in and find your CDK generate the roles that were created from the bootstrapping process. So they all have the same prefix. So this wildcard on the resource is the way to go there. And so if you're scoring at home, now we've bootstrapped the environments, we've created the pipeline, and the role that the pipeline runs as has been given the ability to switch into the roles in the target accounts, and then do CDK CloudFormation deployment type of activities. So again, very heavy security component to today's talk, since we're talking about so much cross-account activity. And again, I created a policy for each one of the different environments. You could just create one policy if you wanted to with multiple statements. I think it's a little cleaner to have a policy per target environment. Okay, and so now that we've gone through all of the setup for the pipeline to allow it access to do things to other accounts, the target accounts, we can just go back and kick off the pipeline to release the changes. And so if we want to do that, let's get back into code pipeline. Let me make this a little bit bigger for you. And we'll get back into our pipeline account. And we have deployed into bus 2. And so here we've got the pipeline here. So in order to release the changes manually, just go out, release changes, and of course it gives you a "Are you sure?" box, and then you say, "Yes, I'm quite sure." Additionally, if you want to create a commit and push it to your repo, that will also kick off the pipeline itself. I think that's definitely a cooler, more applicable way to do this, since we're talking CI/CD. And so here, it's simple as we'll just go ahead and change the README and commit it. And so since we pushed the commit and we've got the webhook set up, it goes ahead and kicks off the pipeline. So pretty cool stuff there. That's the goal. Anytime you have new software, you want to get it out to environments to allow it to be tested, etc. So the longer code, in my opinion, sits stale inside of a branch inside of source control and it's not being used, I just think that results in larger and larger amounts of tech debt. So continuously integrating and deploying the software, definitely the name of the game here. So the pipeline takes quite a bit of time. And so we'll just go ahead and let this thing run, and we'll jump back into the code here. Let's see. Oh, cool. Nice. So to start to talk about, oh, go ahead, Austin. Oh, yeah. Yeah, if you all are into, yeah, for sure. Yeah, less branches, the better. So in December, Austin's doing a really cool meetup in which he's going to talk about trunk-based development and how to manage source control and do CI/CD from there. And so the goal there, trunk, basically kind of a mainline type of development approach. You keep your code inside of kind of your main branch. And how do you organize a development team to be able to work in a productive way without stepping on each other's toes? Well, Austin will definitely cover that in December. So good call out there. If you're interested in trunk-based development, do join us in December. Austin's got a cool talk coming up. So to dive back into the application architecture that we are currently deploying, our application consists of 3 stacks: the core networking, the VPC stack, the database itself, or a read replica, since we're going multi-region, kind of some DR strategy there. We've got an RDS stack, and then finally the API stack, which has Lambda with VPC attachment and API gateway. And so let's take a quick look at a diagram, and then let's take a look at some code. So here, very simple diagrams, excuse me, for a single region deployment, such as what we would do with, a dev or QA. We'll simply deploy API to API gateway, kind of fronting Lambda, and then Lambda's got the VPC attachment, and it goes and hits the RDS database. Very simple diagrams, but we're not as much concerned with the application as we are the deployment practices and pipeline to be able to deploy these things across regions with some DR implemented. And so when we get into the multi-region deployment, we'll deploy the API gateway fronting Lambda in both regions. So it's kind of a hot master, if you will, if you're in DR. And then we have in the primary region, we have a full-blown RDS instance. And then in the secondary region, we have an RDS read replica. And so what happens here is if the primary region goes down, we're able to promote the RDS read replica. We don't have to restore any snapshots because that can take quite a bit of time, constantly being replicated. I think the lag I saw on the instances I set up is something like 37 seconds. So, if that's the case, we lose 37 seconds worth of data. So I think that's a pretty good mark. Definitely much better than dealing with snapshots, etc. So just wanted to kind of highlight the differences between our single and multi-region architectures. And so let's go ahead and dive into the code, because this is really where all the magic happens. And so let's kind of start from the ground up. Everything is going to be, be dependent upon our networking. And so this is actually the same as the last meetup that Austin did, where we go ahead and create a VPC. We're going to have ingress, meaning incoming, and egress, meaning outgoing security groups, set up some CIDR blocks, and then go ahead and set up these security groups to go ahead and add these egress rules, things of that nature. So between the last meetup and now, nothing new here. Then to kind of go further up the stack, we've got the RDS stack itself. And so here, this needs to have a VPC because RDS instances live inside of a VPC, security group defining who can connect to it. I've got a stage here. This is just used for when I create a database, I grab the stage off the property so that I name the database so we know kind of like where this database lives. If we want to replicate the password, kind of going back to the architecture here. Whoops, PowerPoint's gone crazy on me. We want to go ahead and replicate the password from our primary region to our secondary region. If we have, for example, Lambda needs to know the password to connect to RDS. If we tell Lambda to go into a different region to get the password stored within Secret Manager, there's all sorts of extra configuration to set up, and it's just easier to use the Secret Manager secret replication feature, and we can dive into that. But since that secret is created in as a part of the RDS stack, we go ahead and have the ability to specify what regions we want to replicate our secret to. And then finally, if there's a primary RDS instance, in this case, this means we'd be setting up a read replica. We do need a reference to the primary RDS instance so that we can set up the failover. Okay, so let's come down here. In this block, this would be the case in which we do not have a primary RDS instance specified in the call to instantiate the stack. we will go ahead and create a new RDS secret. We're going to go ahead and generate the secret string. As a matter of security, you are not allowed to specify the secret value inside of code. This is done so that secrets do not get stored in source control. This is actually kind of a neat point, because since we're deploying our infrastructure via code and generating a password, a random password, the people that develop the infrastructure as code or the software itself, they actually wouldn't know what your password is in various environments. So this is super important if you don't want your developers to have your production password. Typical compliance use case there. And so here, I just went ahead and used the options to generate a password. These characters cannot be in a Postgres password. So that's kind of what I'm doing there. And then also to replicate the secret, I go ahead and take the array of regions that I want to replicate the secret to, and just create this structure here that the replica regions requires. It's a object of type replica region, which has a property region. So I use this map function to just inline kind of change the shape of the array that comes in representing the regions that we want to replicate the secret to. Sorry, that was a mouthful. And then finally, we go ahead and stand up the Postgres instance. And this is where we go ahead and use that secret value that we just created. Also worth noting, this is a private RDS instance. Please try to keep your databases private. Definitely a security best practice. Then to kind of round this out, if we are setting up a read replica, we're just going to instantiate a database instance read replica that points at the primary region. And so pretty easy peasy stuff there. So very small change in code to create the database read replica, as opposed to a full-blown separate instance of RDS. So that's pretty nice. And then finally, the API stack here, we go ahead and create a function. This is how you instantiate a AWS Lambda. Go ahead and specify, what is the actual handler that needs to be executed when the Lambda is invoked. Since we're accessing RDS, we're going to go ahead and give this the VPC attachment. And so here we've got the VPC property of the function itself. Go ahead and specify subnets, and then also the security group as well, so that we have the ability to go ahead and get at the database. Everything's a zero trust policy inside of AWS. So unless we specifically give things access to a resource, they cannot access it. Good security posture. And so then finally here, we went ahead and created the secret in the RDS stack. We're just going to go ahead and pull that secret from Secret Manager using the secret name itself. And I do this, and I don't just pass around a reference to the secret, because once you start to create a secret in US West 2, and then you try to reference it from US East 1, there's a whole lot of configuration that needs to occur. If we just go ahead and replicate the secret to the secondary region, and then grab it by name using a known secret name, this allows us to get around having to do all the security configuration to allow cross-region, cross-account access to Secret Manager secrets. Definitely a bit of a pain, and so this is just an easier way to do it, in my opinion. And so with all that being said, the real magic in terms of the pipeline is occurring here in the previously covered CDK Pipeline stack.ts file. Firstly, we'll just start at the top. We define our app stage. And again, a stage in CDK parlance is a single deployment unit of your application. So if you have a database and you have a VPC, and then you have your actual API code, all of that goes together in your application stage. And so in order to create the application stage, first we'll need to new up the VPC stack. Then we'll need to new up the RDS stack, as it depends on things from the VPC stack. And then finally, we need to instantiate the API stack, as it depends on things from the VPC stack, as well as the RDS stack. And then there's a couple options here within RDS that we kind of covered: the secret replication region and primary RDS instance. These are optional. And so we can kind of cover how we deal with that. So getting into the actual pipeline itself, we go ahead and define a new code pipeline. Since we're doing cross-account things, we have to set this cross-account keys to true. This allows assets to be copied and encrypted and all sorts of complex cross-account things that's occurring behind the scenes. Conveniently for us, it's a Boolean parameter we just set to true. So it's pretty cool. Pipeline name, and then also the final sense step of the pipeline. And this is where we actually, if you recall from the pipeline components, we actually build out the CloudFormation in a build step, and then that CloudFormation is applied to the appropriate regions. And so here we go ahead and create this shell step that's going to go ahead and use the GitHub source and then run the commands npm CI and run build. That's going to go ahead and build out the npm project, the Node.js project that is the Lambda. And then we're going to run this npx CDK synth, and that goes ahead and generates all of the CloudFormation that's used in the subsequent deployment steps. Okay, so we're getting pretty close to the end here, so bear with me for just a second more. I have defined things in waves. And if you recall from the beginning, a wave allows us to deploy multiple app stages in parallel. And so where we have two regions and 3 accounts, this could be 6 total deployments. And that's like super slow, especially if you're dealing with a brand new RDS instance. So, if you think about what is it that we would be able to kind of run in, I'm going to pull up a diagram here. I think it's a good talking point. Oh, my goodness. Okay, so looking at the different accounts and regions here, there's no real reason we couldn't deploy dev and QA at the same time. They're independent of each other. Then we start to talk about the primary and secondary. I generally like to let the primary finish before deploying the secondary, especially since there's a database read replica. We want the primary database RDS instance to be ready whenever we try to create the read replica. And so with that being the case, we could have one wave for deploying dev and QA. We could have another wave for deploying the primary regions within our multi-region setup here for stage and prod. And then a third wave for deploying the backup regions. And so that's how I've organized it. I certainly think there's a lot of debate that could go on about how to structure the stages of a pipeline. I just wanted to kind of show off some of the abilities to use waves to make things go in parallel to make the pipeline in general faster. And so with that being said, jumping back into the code, here we've got the dev and QA deployments wave. We knew up the stage for dev. We knew up the app stage for QA. And here we can specify inside of this env property the account that we want to deploy to, as well as the region we want to deploy to. So dev will be in the primary region within the dev account, and QA will be in the secondary region within the dev account. And so then finally, just adding those stages to this dev QA wave is the final piece that's required there. And so we get into the wave to deploy the primary RDS regions. And we've called this primary DB region deployments. Worth noting, we can cover this a little bit in a later slide, is robust pipelines require approval, testing, things of that nature. Inside of the code, it's extremely easy to add approval steps. And here we're going to do this as a pre-step. And so before anything inside of this wave is deployed, prior to that, this manual approval step needs to be completed. And you can dive into these and start connecting them to SNS topics and doing emails and things of that nature. But I just got a pretty simple kind of push button approval process. And I've built that into the pipeline with just one line of code. Very convenient, I would say. So here, the primary database region for stage and the primary database region for prod, we go ahead and set those up. And again, it's just super easy, given we can just say, okay, hey, deploy this to the stage account ID, deploy this to the prod account ID, primary region, primary region. So we also need to specify that we want to replicate our secrets, the RDS password, out to the secondary region because cross-region and cross-account sharing of secrets is very hard. So finally, we go ahead and add those into this primary RDS wave. And then the final piece here is to set up a deployment wave for the backup regions on stage and prod. So again, it's just a matter of defining the wave, defining the regions. Again, stage account for stage, prod account for prod. This is all going to be in the secondary region, which we're defaulting to East 1 up here. Whoops, excuse the scrolling. And then we go ahead and add these to the stage. So in just less than 40 lines of code, let's see here, we go all the way up here. In about 40 lines of code, we've defined a very robust pipeline that will deploy dev and QA at the same time to the same account in different regions. Then after manual approval occurs, it will deploy the primary RDS for stage and prod along with the infrastructure that goes along with it in the app stage. And then finally, we go ahead and deploy the secondary or backup infrastructure as well. And so what this looks like inside of Code Pipeline, looks like I've timed out here. 1 second, please. Here we go. So let's jump back into Code Pipeline. And let's take a look at, from a visual standpoint, what does the pipeline look like? Okay, so we've got the source step here. That's where we go out and get the code. We've got the build step here. This is where we go ahead and generate our CloudFormation using that CDK synth command. CDK synth in particular, and the CDK CLI is a command that generates the CloudFormation as output. And so once we have the CloudFormation output, we're then able to distribute it and apply it to various regions and accounts. At that point, the pipeline itself will go and check to see if we've added or removed any kind of stages. For example, if we were to just comment out the whole business around the secondary RDS regions, the pipeline itself would need to modify itself. And so the self-mutation of the pipeline allows you to encode, add new deployments, and it be smart enough to know that it needs to change and add new steps, remove steps, etc. And so then the assets, the CloudFormation templates, most importantly in this case, then also the code for the Lambda would be another thing. They have to be deployed out to the various regions, so it gathers up and organizes the assets that are used during the deployment. And then finally, we get into our waves here. And so here's that dev and QA deployment. And you can see that these are running right beside each other. I think as kind of proof, you see the time on the steps are pretty much identical. So those ran right beside each other in parallel, kind of using a little bit less time to get the deployment completed. Okay, so here we have that manual approval step that I showed in the code. And so here, ideally, I think you'd want to email a product owner or something like that and say, hey, we're requiring your approval to deploy to stage and prod. Go ahead and click this link and it brings them here. I didn't configure the email. It's certainly something that's easy to do with the various notification services within AWS. But eventually, they'll get in here and go through, the process. And again, the person that does this review, this is all recorded. So then you've got your audit trail for your software deployments. So that's important for compliance reasons in a lot of organizations. And so just a simple click button approval there. And let's see here. I think I may have stopped the pipeline prior. And so I've also created many commits. Okay, so it's got this little process over here of things that are spinning. And so it looks like we are in the approval process here. Interesting. Demo bugs. I think since I've got so many transitions, or it's like me. Let's see here. I've got too much stuff going on here. We'll go through the release changes here again. So yeah, little demo bug here. But yeah, after the approval process, we went ahead and abandoned this since it seemed like it got stuck for some reason. I may have just been not patient enough. It goes ahead and starts to deploy the primary regions for both prod and stage. Then once those are done, it'll go ahead and deploy out the backup regions for both prod and stage. So while that's going on in the background, what does this actually look like when we get out to the various accounts? Let's go ahead and jump into what we're calling the prod account here. We don't have the pipeline in the prod account. I think it is worth noting that the various stacks that are created, you can see them out in CloudFormation, out in the target accounts. And so West 2 is our primary account for prod. So here we see prod, primary API, RDS, and VPC stack. Our secondary region being US East 1. We can see these backup stacks out here. And so this is pretty cool because you can go out here and then, if you want to take a look at some of the outputs, for example, the secret name, the endpoint, stuff of that nature. That's all, as per the expected within CloudFormation, the information you can get out of that. Maybe a little bit more interesting would be to take a look at RDS, for example. And so this has, bear with me. So in our secondary region, we'll go out here, take a look at the RDS. And so we've got our RDS instance prod backup. We can go ahead and take a look at the primary region. We will have the prod primary. So jumping into this instance, we can go take a look at the replication, and we can see that we've configured the read replica over here and back up in Northern Virginia. If something were to happen and our infrastructure in our primary region goes down, the replication is ongoing. So jumping back into the secondary / backup region, just real quick, we would simply have to promote our RDS read replica to no longer be a read-only instance, and then we'd be good to go. Our application be ready to get back on its feet, and we'd have pretty minimal downtime. So that's definitely the goal. Talking about disaster recovery is understanding how long you can be down for, how much information you can lose, and setting up your infrastructure in a way that promotes those targets in terms of resiliency. Just kind of rounding out some of the other services that we have deployed to out here in Lambda. We'll see our GraphQL API that's been deployed as a Lambda. And then we've got the actual code and stuff of that nature over here. So that pretty much rounds out the services that we have deployed into. So let's go ahead before I kind of go back to the slides and round out the presentation. Let's take a quick look at code pipeline and see where it is in that deployment. 1 second, please. So at this point, it's in the process of creating the assets. So I'm just going to go ahead and switch up over to the slide deck, and we can go from there. Okay. So at this point, we have talked about running the pipeline, the application architecture. All right, so I've mentioned a little bit of this, but just to kind of reiterate, I think a very important point, multi-region, multi-account deployments are tough. And so I think 2 of the biggest things I'd like to highlight here is if you've got secrets, parameter store, etc., and you try to go from one region to another and get at the secret or the system manager parameter, etc., that requires additional setup. And so replicating the secrets, in my opinion, is the easiest way to get around that hurdle. And the good news there is once you update the secret in the kind of the source, or like it'd be our primary region, the secret in the primary region where it's replicated out to the secondary region, it will replicate that change to the secret value. So this is super important for password rotation, for example. And then also another pain point when dealing with multi-account, multi-region deployments is KMS keys. A lot of times people use the default keys, and a default key for a service is specific to an account in a region. And so if you're dealing with needing to encrypt and decrypt data across multiple regions and accounts, you will have to do things to manage your KMS keys because they're not really portable across regions by default, to state that in a super high level kind of way. Let's see. So we talked about the waves. 6 different deployments RDS takes quite a while. So I used waves to go ahead and parallelize the deployment of multiple stages. Again, QA and dev at the same time, the primary regions, and then the secondary regions. And then finally, to get into actions, approval and testing are critical aspects of a good CI/CD pipeline. So the approval step, we took a look at that. Additionally, to dive into the code, these pre and post steps can also be used to run shell scripts. And so after, let's say you deploy API gateway and Lambda in your database, maybe the play here is in a post step to run a script that issues a curl command to create an entity via the API, and then another curl command that does a get by ID to ensure that the entity was created in the database. And so you can build, using these actions, you can build an extremely robust pipeline that incorporates testing and approval workflows, etc. So to kind of round out the talk, how to clean up everything that is deployed, each stack, VPC, RDS, and API is deployed independently. So this is important because, let's say you go into your code and you make a change to maybe add another security group to the VPC. then you don't really want to have to redeploy the RDS stack and the API stack. You really only want to have to update the stacks that have changed. And so these being deployed independently allows that to occur, kind of gives some autonomy between the different stacks. If you want everything to be deployed via a single manageable stack, you can look into nested stacks to kind of organize and group your stacks together. So with all that being said, we'll go ahead and approve that. And then let's take a spin over to one of the target accounts just to take a quick look at the CloudFormation and where to go and delete these stacks and stuff of that nature. So going into CloudFormation, we're in the dev account, we're in our primary region. I did try to deploy the pipeline just for a demo here. So that's that rollback there. Normally the CDK pipeline stack would not be in your target accounts. But anywho, so here we've got dev, API, RDS, and VPC stack. Want to go ahead and deprovision these in reverse order because API stack depends on RDS stack, VPC stack depends, or RDS depends on VPC. And so to go ahead and clean up all of these resources simply is using the ability to delete stacks from CloudFormation. So definitely, if you've been following along, or if you grab the repo at another time, do not forget to clean up your resources. RDS is not necessarily a cheap service. It's not free. It's not super expensive, but you don't want that stuff out there running and accruing a bill for sure. So let's see here. Go back into code pipeline real quick. Okay, so I think I just wasn't patient enough previously. So after the manual approval, it did take a little bit of time, but it started to deploy the subsequent steps inside of the wave that had this manual approval step set up as a precondition of the wave itself. And so it'll go through the rest of this stuff, then down into the secondary DB deployments wave, and that is kind of the execution of the pipeline here. So I think kind of an important point, the usage of waves basically allows us to cut the time it takes to run the entire pipeline from end to end in half. So definitely would encourage parallelism in your deployments wherever possible, because one of the core goals you're trying to get out of a good CI/CD pipeline is a short feedback loop. So you make a change to your code, you don't want to have to wait 4 hours to have to test it. So shortening the feedback loop is very critical in modern software development. And so running your deployments in parallel is another tactic to allow you to kind of shorten that feedback loop. And so with all that being said, I do believe that is all that I've got for today. So let me go ahead and switch back over to PowerPoint, kind of round us out. Firstly, I know I've been talking for quite some time. So any questions, I'm definitely happy to take them at this point. Cool. So thank you again for joining. Please do connect with us out on LinkedIn. It's a good way to, if you have a question that comes up later, hit me up on LinkedIn, more than happy to help. In terms of upcoming meetups, we have a meetup on November 10th going from MVP to production using AWS serverless technologies. We've got Chris Gradwell coming in to do that, full stack engineer and serverless architect at Courier. And then in December, Austin is doing the trunk-based CI/CD conversation, and I will go ahead and turn it back over to Austin with that being said. Yeah, of course. Thank you. Yeah, thank you everyone for joining. And like I said, if any questions come up later, just hit us up on the meetup chat, or hit us up on LinkedIn. We're always pretty geeked to talk shop, so let us know if any questions do come up. Oh yeah, that's a good point. Yeah, that's a great Slack. Yeah, from the top. So what we'll do is we will go ahead and fully publish the YouTube live stream, and you can watch it in perpetuity in slow motion. Nice. Cool. Thanks, Austin. Hope everyone has a nice night.
Hey, the Denver Dev Slack says it's